Nobody wants to say anything that's going to be taken a certain way. But somebody's going to slip up at some point. Some players and coaches going to say something. Or there's going to be a number of things that aren't necessarily that controversial, but we'll make a big deal out of them. But there'll be a few things there. But as Brent states, and he's attended many more of these than I have. I was on a 7-year run in the late 90s into the 2000s there in the SEC. But he is exactly right. What you pick up from other writers and broadcasters, and then also just talking to the coaches when they're off record and some of the players can be fascinating at times.
Yeah, it really can. That's the thing that's so great about it, too. And again, having it in Hoover is always fascinating. And that's been in Hoover every year, except for a couple of years ago when it was in Atlanta. I remember we basically didn't have it last year, frankly, because of the COVID situation. So it's great to be back together again. I frankly wish they'd leave it in Hoover because Birmingham is kind of the midpoint for everybody to drive. Let's be honest about this. If Media Days is in St. Louis, New Orleans, if it's in Dallas, your average person in the media very well may not drive that far in order to do so. So, but look, still, it's just great to see these guys face to face. It's good to be able to. You always get some nuggets, particularly if you're in what we call the print room. That's the big room. Now, I've been at Media Days every year except one since '92. So to have seen it change over the time is very fascinating. I mean,
Brent, had I known at the time, not to interrupt you, I would have said hi all those years.
Really? Absolutely.
We were there together for about 7 years, and I didn't say hi.
Well, and again, Mark and I laugh about that. Mark and I laugh about that because simply they're about, what, Mark, 500 members of the media there, and it's grown pretty much every year. Now, this may be a little bit of an exception with this, but you've got people who are doing the best they can with stories. When I first started with Rivals.com years ago, when it really was just up and going, and Shannon Terry was in charge of it, Shannon been at 24/7 and now about to be starting with On 3. I wrote an article about every coach and every player. And I remember just basically collapsing on the whenever it was over, Mark, and promised myself I'm glad I've been able to do it, but I'll never do it again to that extent. But and you'll hear a lot of this. Well, we don't get anything out of it and so forth. Well, you do get something out of it when you try. Look, too many of our brethren and sistren can get lazy at conferences like this and not try to get anything. But that's the thing that I enjoy, Mark, is kind of digging and talking to people and finding things out. Some of it will be off the record, obviously, but when you talk to beat writers, and you have a lot of these guys and girls on, but when you talk to beat writers, you learn a whole lot more than you'll ever learn just about at any other time. Now, the problem with the parameters that we've got, we can't see practice half the time or 3/4 of the time, and you've got limited access. But that's still the fun of it is just to be able to find out some information, hear how these coaches are able to handle the pressure, frankly, from the media. There've been some fascinating things about Media Days. You remember when Phil Fulmer was subpoenaed years ago? I've got some friends that do broadcasting in Memphis, and they said he was at the table with them when the subpoena was given to him. There was another time when Lou Holtz was coaching South Carolina, and some of the South Carolina beat writers told me, well, he just didn't want to be here this year, and did it from a speakerphone in the print room. So people were able to ask questions at that point. And Steve Spurrier, when he was at Florida, Roy Kramer was in the back of the room, the commissioner at that point, and someone talked and asked Steve Spurrier about the potential of a playoff. And Spurrier says, well, I don't see no reason why we can't have a playoff. Coach Kramer, you're in the back of the room. Why can't we have a playoff? So, I mean, Roy obviously was taken aback. He just grinned and just kind of let it go with that. But there are some classic moments at media days.
There are. I remember putting together I'll say, quote unquote, story of sorts. It wasn't really a story. It was more of a montage just to show the hilarity of the repetition of statements that are made. And I kind of made my collection, with based on my former experience, but then also hanging around there for a couple interviews early morning the first day. I thought, we're hearing, one game at a time, and on down the line, we're hearing this over and over. And I put this collage of video clips together that was no masterpiece of craftsmanship by myself. But once you put it all together, it was just hysterical to hear the repetition of the coach speak over and over and over and over.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, what is different this year is, now he gets philosophical, but if you listen to Nick Saban, you would get a lot more information out of him than you think you will. And the beat writers will tell you that. And that's interesting. Now, again, the two Mississippi coaches and Lane Kiffin, and particularly Mike Leach, you really never know what you're going to get out of either one of those guys. I think Sam Pittman will be fine. Look, any guy who can go to Arkansas and begin to turn that thing around after Chad Morris left deserves, I think, to be heard. Now, the truth of the matter is, Mark, probably 70% of that media have never heard Brian Harsin of Auburn. So that they'll be fascinating to hear him talk a little bit. Probably hadn't heard Clark Lee either, and Shane Beamer. We know about Dad, but we don't know about Shane. I mean, obviously we do because we followed him, but in that mode as a head coach, that will be fascinating to see where that goes during that time also. So there's always some fascinating things to be there. I mean, there's some oddities going on this year for whatever reason. And I want to find out about this as we get closer. Florida and Dan Mullen is not taking an offensive player. I thought, what in the world is that about? So look, I get not taking your quarterback, but because we don't know who that's going to be, Emory Jones, everybody thinks is going to be the quarterback in this point too. And to compare a lot of SEC schools, and I get this, aren't taking their quarterback because they haven't had much experience. But you've got Florida State in the ACC. They're not taking just one, Mark. They're taking two. Jordan Travis and Mackenzie Milton. So I thought that was very interesting to see where that goes. I have always maintained, and I'm curious what you think about this. My ideal for years has been leave one of the players home and bring one of the coordinators. But I think the reality is coaches would probably be insecure in bringing their coordinators. Listen, can you imagine if Lane Kiffin, when he was OC at Alabama, had come to media days when Nick Saban was head coach? There have been some outstanding. Can you imagine Joe Lee Dunn of Mississippi State with no socks on, of course, at media days? I just think I think those guys deserve, and they've worked hard to have their day in the sun. And I don't know what you think about that, Mark, but I've just always thought having one of the coordinators would be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I don't think you could have gotten a tie on Joe Lee Dunn for 3 or 4 hours to pull that off. I don't think that would have happened.
No, maybe a sport coat, but that'd be about it.
Jolie Dunn is somebody that I got familiar with very quickly when I took my first job in SEC country in Mississippi, because he had just become the head coach at Ole Miss, and they were in all sorts of NCAA trouble when he took the reins there, and he fared very well under the circumstances there, but just a defensive genius for years and years and years moving throughout the SEC. But it is interesting to note the strategy of the coaches in selecting the players. So they just don't select the three best players on the team, and here we go.
Right.
They want to make a statement. Of course, all the players can play that come. They're not selecting backup guards or anything like that. But at the same time, they want to recognize and reward those players that have worked hard, that have been great representatives of the institution, of the football program, and have been leaders on the team, as in addition to really good players. A couple other things that you stated there, Brent, brought things to mind when you talk about Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin representing the state of Mississippi and never knowing what's going to come out of their mouths. I was thinking, okay, if we could have an all-star team of coaches through the years, of course, we would keep those two in their spots, and we would bring back Les Miles and Brett Bielema, Steve Spurrier to South Carolina, LSU, and Arkansas to spice things up.
Oh yeah, yes. And maybe the best one of all was the interim coach at Vanderbilt, who was there only one time. Robbie was his first name, and when we hang up, I'll remember it. But he started talking about being on the farm and farm animals and things of that nature. So that was a hoot, to say the least. Now, Spurrier was always tremendous when he was there, because you really didn't know what he was going to say during that time either. That's a good point. Better ask the right questions with Saban. What you don't want to do with Nick Saban is ask a depth chart question. That's not going to go over real well, to say the least. But again, I always enjoy the new coaches. I mean, how's Josh Heupel going to handle this? I mean, he did a good job at UCF. And by the way, Florida and UCF have struck some kind of a deal to play in a series that was just announced a few minutes ago. You remember the jawing back and forth between those two fan bases. So that's going to be fascinating. And again, we mentioned Shane Beamer, and we mentioned the new coaches, obviously at Vanderbilt during that time, and Brian Harsin. But look, there's something different about facing that throng of media when you're new, as far as how that's going to go. Now, Jimbo Fisher's always entertaining, because Jimbo could be an auctioneer without any problem whatsoever. He speaks so rapidly during that time, but he's and look, Mark, I mean, we know the questions for Kirby Smart. Are you ever going to be able to get over the hump? Nick Saban, can you repeat again at this point? I mean, we know about and listen, I'm sure that Ed, help me on this. I'm guessing Ed Orgeron, before he begins his comments, will probably make some kind of statement about Title IX. And in fairness, he probably needs to say this, that he can't comment on an ongoing investigation. Could you see him? Could you either see him or somebody handling that way, Mark?
Yes, and as soon as you brought up the name Ed Orgeron, I thought of a number of circumstances throughout the years where, regardless of the conference, the media days have been that first confrontation between media and head coach, who whether by his doing or others, was facing a difficult situation, a controversial situation that was the topic at hand, the topic that the media really wanted to hear about. We saw one with Urban Meyer in Ohio State prior to his final season that really blew up to be huge, of course, that caused his suspension for 3 games. But Ed Orgeron, you know that either they're going to be that upfront about it just to say, hey, we're completely dismissing this because of legal ramifications and because of investigation purposes. Therefore, it's not going to be addressed, or maybe he will get out in front of it to lighten the range of questions, to get out in front of it, to make it a talking point that he's going to initiate in his way, going down his path to try to take the offensive, possibly.
Well, and there'll be the typical questions on the NIL, of course, and how they get in front of it. I hope we don't waste too much time on that. That there will be a lot of questions on expanding the playoffs, of course. And those are legitimate questions too. Now, one thing's going to be fascinating too, Mark, is with Dan Mullen, his own behavior. People laughed off the Darth Vader stuff, but the almost starting a brawl in the Missouri game at halftime in the beginning of that, calling his team a scout team on after the Oklahoma loss, and to Dan's credit, I mean, he even said something in one interview about that he learned a lot about himself during the year. I really wonder if what the media will do with that. And look, Mark, frankly, those are legitimate questions. As far as, Coach, what have you learned from these incidents as you go forward with this? I don't think that's off limits myself. You may disagree, but that caused a lot of controversy around here. He probably won't spend a lot of time on any of that, but I'll be very curious how, if and how that is brought up to him.
It could also be crafted in a certain way to let Dan Mullen know, make him realize that this is not a coach that took a big time job for the first time. These were not errors that were made by Lane Kiffin at 29 years old at his first job. You've been doing this a long time, and for you to make this many mistakes or to step out of bounds this many times in your 13th season, whatever the number is, at this level of a position in the SEC is, have you contemplated how concerning that could be to some?
Well, and that's why I say there are times that when you do things, you at some point you speak about those decisions, and that's only fair to be able to do that. We talked years about in the perfect world that after a game you would have the officials or someone answer questions after that, and just the not so much that you lazy so and so bum you. I think what would be fair with that would be, what in the world did you see? I think that would be fair. And again, that's in the perfect world, Mark. I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. But look, there are times I think it's fair game for coaches to be asked these questions. And look, you can do it in a way to where you're not accusatory, but at the same time, I'll be very curious as far as how Ed Orgeron deals with any of this Title 9 stuff. I think he'll nip that in the bud in the beginning, and also certainly with Dan Mullen with the questions about even some of his behavior going on. I think that would be fascinating to see where that goes.
a number of people in the live chat had commented about, yeah, with Nick Saban, you be careful about what you ask him and how you ask it. And it reminds me of, I've got to switch sports to give this example, and you'll remember this, Coach. Many probably in the live chat won't, even though he went to a Final Four. Richard Williams at Mississippi State was a guy that I got to know pretty well in covering his basketball team, Ole Miss and Alabama, for a period of 7 years. And Richard Williams was such a sharp individual. He was an educator in addition to basketball coach. He would not give the media a pass on, Brent, especially post game. A lot of the comments made by the media, they just want the coach to start talking.
Sure.
So they'll just throw out a phrase. It won't
Right.
be a legitimate question. It'll be like, so-and-so really stepped up tonight, or tough loss. And he'll be like, he wants you to ask an informed, logical question. So he won't put up with that. I remember somebody once asking him, or making the statement, do you control your own destiny in the division race? And he said, why are you asking me this question? You can do the math, go to the schedule, add up the rankings, the standings within the division. He wouldn't put up with anything that didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time, I'm a rookie in the SEC. This is basically, I'm about a month in the door at the time, and I will go to SEC basketball media days. And I asked him a question comparing his point guards that were vying for the position. And he holds his hands up because he had been answering questions for 20, 25 minutes. And he said, did everybody hear that? That was actually a legitimate, logical question that made sense, that had to do with, and he actually pointed out to everyone that this wasn't just me, people throwing out phrases and names and expecting a response.
Well, and listen, part of the issue going on right now with the media is you've had, unfortunately, Mark, we've had so many people, and a lot of this has been very unfair, but they have lost their job due to cost cutting, and particularly the veteran media over the years. That what we've got now, and look, I've got two millennials, okay, and their daughters, so I get this, I really do. But let's be real honest about this. Sometimes when you've got young people in the media, Mark, they don't have the frame of reference that a lot of us do as far as comparing and contrasting and even knowing what to say, maybe sometimes not knowing what to say. So my concern sometimes in these situations would be exactly what you're saying is some of these coaches, they're tired, they've had a long day, that they've dealt with this maybe for 2 days by the time they step in there with us, and a lot of them, they don't take either a phrase or a lazy question very well. So I will be interested in that interaction between the media and some of these coaches sometimes.
You mentioned Nick Saban, and he was mentioned in the chat, of course. What fascinates me about Nick Saban's appearance at SEC Media Days every year is that he takes that as an opportunity to evaluate not just his team or the SEC. It's typically about college football. It's about the landscape, whatever really is on his mind that either inspires him or bothers him about the state of the game and what should be done. And he takes that as an opportunity to use that as a platform in not a heavy-handed way, in a very eloquent way, but a firm way to say, this is what's wrong with our sport right now, or this is what issue we're facing. This is what we need to do. And I find it very enlightening.
Saban, in a lot of ways, is the unofficial czar of college football. And he will deal with NIL and the playoffs and these big topic issues really in a very logical, well thought out way, because part of what's going on is he's gotten ahead of these things. He has a plan for everything frankly. But you're right. And when he has a chance to be in front of the media, that there are several things going on here. You can never forget this about Saban. Number one, when he's speaking to recruits. Number two, he's speaking to his football team. And number three, he has a message to get out because he knows he's got a national platform. And Mark, as you know, every day when you've got this kind of media, this is unprecedented coverage. And what these guys say is just frankly reaches everybody. And Mark, it reaches. Listen, right now, let's say Saban speaks Wednesday. He's the first speaker, so he'll be up by let's say 9:00 Central Time. Well, in the first 15 minutes of what he says, if it's something really significant, it goes from Birmingham to the West Coast almost instantaneously. So it compared to what we had with the old Skyriders tour decades ago, when media would hop in a plane and go from campus to campus. You've got the ability to speak to people and get your message out. It's just unequal compared to what it used to be.
And then taking us from SEC media days, it's only going to be a matter of days until the players are on the field and battling for positions at 14 different destinations.